All right, so now we're going to move on and to our next speaker. Her name is Anne Baring. She's going to speak on the dream of the cosmos. Anne has a PhD in wisdom studies from Ubiquity University. She's a Jungian analyst, author and co-author of 7 books, including with Jules Ashford, The Myth of the Goddess, Evolution of an Image, and with Andrew Harvey, The Mystic Vision and the Divine Feminine, with Dr. Celia Ellsworthy, Soul Power, An Agenda for a Conscious Humanity. And her most recent book, The Dream of the Cosmos, A Quest for the Soul. The ground for all of her work is a deep interest in the spiritual, mythological, shamanic, and artistic traditions of different cultures. Her website is devoted to the affirmation of a new vision of reality and the issues facing us at the crucial time of choice. And I think if you go on her website, you will find there are other quite amazing aspects of Anne's life. She's lived a very interesting and I imagine exciting life. And she's going to speak, as I said, the dream of the cosmos, a new cosmology. Anne, welcome to the symposium.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, very honored to be here. Now I want to just share my screen, see if it works. I'm going to give you a panoramic view of 5 cosmologies that have had a profound effect on the development of Western civilization, beginning with the cosmology of the Lunar Era of the Great Mother. This was a cosmology of profound connection and relationship. The philosopher Owen Barfield called it original participation. To understand something of immense importance that was lost millennia ago, we need to go back to the Neolithic era when the cosmos was imagined as a mother, from whose womb all forms of life emerged in a continuous cycle of birth, death, and regeneration. What we now call cosmos and nature was a living web of relationships ensouled by the Great Mother. Life was an organic, living, and sacred whole, and we were part of that whole. The Milky Way was the starry passage by which souls entered and left this world, and the shamanic journey into other dimensions of reality was the spiritual experience throughout this era. The most important idea about this time is that there was no creator beyond creation, no separation between the Great Mother as source or womb and the myriad forms of her life. No separation, therefore, between spirit and nature. All life was one. Just as the stars emerged each night from the darkness of the night sky, so the visible universe was born from the dark mystery of the invisible. Everything was infused with divinity because each and all were part of a sacred cosmic order, the web of life of the Great Mother. The cosmology of the Lunar Era was focused on a cyclical process of birth, death, and regeneration that arose from the age-old observation of the recurring phases of the moon, its birth as a crescent, its waxing to fullness, and its waning into the 3 days of darkness. Out of that darkness, the crescent was continually reborn. Light and darkness, life and death were not polarized as they were to become in the subsequent era, but were 2 phases of a total cycle, always leading to regeneration and a new cycle. Woman was revered because, like nature, the Great Mother, she was the carrier of new life. The 10 lunar months of gestation were associated with the swelling of the crescent moon as it rose to fullness. Through an expanded consciousness, assisted by the use of psychedelic plants, people in the lunar era had a sense of kinship with all creation. They saw their lives as part of the great cosmic cycle of birth, death, and renewal, and knew through shamanic experience that although the body died, their soul would take another form in a new life. This was the origin of belief in reincarnation. We can follow the transition from the Great Mother of the Neolithic era to the great goddesses of the Bronze Age, goddesses such as Isis in Egypt, Inanna in Sumer, and Artemis of Ephesus, all of whom were worshipped as the Queen of Heaven and associated with the moon. For many thousands of years, the Great Mother and these great goddesses personified the principle of relationship, the interconnectedness of every aspect of life, and above all, the sacredness of the great web of life. The sacred marriage of goddess and god was the greatest ceremony of the year in Egypt and Sumer, holding heaven and earth and the feminine and masculine archetypes in relation to each other. The primary question of the lunar era was, how should the human community act so as to be in harmony with the life of the cosmos? As the last speaker has said, this was of supreme importance. Out of this question came the laws that govern society and the mathematical laws that govern the cosmos. Plato, in his Timaeus, was the first to give a name to this all-embracing cosmic entity, which he described as a single living creature that encompasses all the living creatures that are within it. He called it the soul of the cosmos. The priceless insight of this era was the understanding that the cosmos has an inner life, a soul, and that this cosmic soul is the origin or ground of our own individual soul, our own consciousness. The cosmology of the lunar era begins to fade after the pre-Socratic philosophers and this statement by Plato. The cosmology of the subsequent solar era, which has lasted 4,000 years, from circa 2000 BCE to the present day, was radically different from that of the lunar era. It is, as Owen Barfield described it, a cosmology of separation, characterized by dissociation, duality, and polarization, that were the result of the separation of nature from spirit. During the course of it, we lost the ancient participatory consciousness that we had had in the lunar era, and the sense that we lived within a sacred order. This has only survived to our time in the indigenous cultures. The focus of this whole era is on the gradual emergence of the outstanding individual from the collective life of the tribe and the development of what we call our conscious rational mind. But it is also about a violent and traumatic separation from the deeper matrix of the soul or psyche, and a severance of our relationship with nature and the earth. The drive for territorial conquest, power, and dominance, led by warrior kings and nation states, replaced the older lunar emphasis on relationship with a harmonious cosmic order, a relationship that had been supported by precise astronomical observations gathered over millennia and celebrated in the ceremony of the sacred marriage. During the solar era, the sun replaced the moon as the primary celestial body. Between the lunar and the solar eras, there was a time in Egypt, Sumer, Greece, and Rome when goddesses and gods peopled the heavens, and, as in the Iliad and the Odyssey, interacted with humans. Ultimately, however, in the three patriarchal religions, the Great Father replaced the Great Mother as the sole image of deity. Because of this, Western civilization developed on the foundation of a fundamental dissociation between spirit and nature, creator and creation, and between the masculine and feminine archetypes. This dissociation effectively destroyed the ancient shamanic understanding of the presence of spirit in the material world and opened the way to its exploitation. Two immensely powerful and polarizing cosmologies became the major influence on the social, political, and religious history of Western civilization. The first of these, and the principal mythic theme of the solar era, was the battle between light and darkness, good and evil, order and chaos. This polarizing cosmology, projected into the world and acted out there, led to a continual succession of wars, conquests, and the creation of vast empires, lasting until the present time. Ultimately, it would lead to the battle to conquer and subjugate nature in the service of man. The feminine archetype associated with the goddess and with nature was split off from transcendent spirit. Nature and the earth were therefore no longer sacred. Man was identified with spirit, light, and order, and woman with nature, darkness, and chaos. Man assumed a position of dominance over nature and woman's voice was silenced for 4,000 years, until very recently. Her value consisted solely in her being the carrier of man's seed. The key theme of the solar era is the transcendence of nature, ascent to the light, and repudiation of the darkness associated with nature. The development of the conscious mind in humanity as a whole, together with its stupendous cultural and scientific achievements, can be recognized as the evolutionary achievement of the solar era. But this achievement gradually opened a chasm between spirit, associated with mind, and nature, associated with the body and matter. This whole process was closely tied into the invention of writing and the power that literacy gave to an elite group of very powerful rulers and priesthoods. Our former relationship with nature was gradually weakened as the image of deity changed from Great Mother to Great Father. The loss of the Great Mother and the goddess came in stages in different areas, but there was a second polarizing cosmology that accelerated their demise. This was the myth of the fall of man, described in Genesis 2 and 3. For 2.5 millennia, this myth has been interpreted as divine revelation. An enormous change in Hebrew cosmology took place in 621 BCE, when monotheism was established in Judaism by a group of priests called Deuteronomists. The Jewish people once worshipped both a goddess and a god, a queen and a king of heaven, who together created the world. The Queen of Heaven was worshipped as the Holy Spirit and divine wisdom, and also as the tree of life, a cosmic tree connecting the invisible and visible worlds, whose fruit was the gift of immortality. The Deuteronomists eradicated all trace of the goddess Ashara, the Queen of Heaven. They then created the myth of the fall, cleverly downgrading the goddess into the human figure of Eve and bestowing on her the former title of the goddess, Mother of all living. In this way, the divine feminine aspect of the Godhead was excised from Judaism, leaving Yahweh as the sole creator God. Christianity adopted this image of God, as well as the myth of the fall, from Judaism. In 325 of the Christian era, the Council of Nicaea named Jesus as the only Son of God, whose sacrificial death had ensured our salvation and redemption from sin. The loss of the goddess was the primary reason that we lost our relationship with nature, because in ancient civilizations, the goddess had personified nature for thousands of years, many thousands of years. In this new patriarchal cosmology, the image of deity is the transcendent Great Father. Divine immanence is lost. Earth is designated a place of exile and punishment for primordial sin by a vindictive God. It is no longer sacred. Adam is given dominion over the animals, but he is no longer part of the divine order. He is exiled to a world contaminated by the fall and subject to sin, suffering, and death, introduced into the world by Eve. From the perspective of our relationship with the earth, this cosmology was a disaster. Nature, split off from spirit, was effectively de-souled. We lost the sense of harmony and trust in the cosmos, and the awareness that spirit was active and present within the world. We lost the sense of living within a sacred web of life, a sacred order. It imprinted on us a negative image of our presence on this planet and placed a heavy burden of guilt and shame, particularly sexual shame, on our shoulders. Since Eve was the prime agent of the fall, she was to blame for our banishment from the Garden of Eden, and this led to the unrelenting persecution of women, reinforcing the misogyny characteristic of this whole era. If we want to understand the roots of our present environmental and spiritual crisis, we can find them in the loss of three important elements during the solar era: the divine feminine image of spirit, the direct shamanic path of communion with spirit, and the sacred marriage of the masculine and feminine aspects of the divine ground. The theme of the lost feminine value weaves like a golden thread through the mythology, poetry, and literature of Western civilization, waiting to be redeemed at the present time when the dissociation between spirit and nature might be healed. Now I come to the cosmology of Kabbalah, which is the only cosmology in the West which retained the image of the divine feminine. Kabbalah is the mystical tradition of Judaism, known as the voice of the dove and the jewels of the heavenly bride. Its origins are obscure, but I believe its cosmology may have originated in the first temple in Jerusalem, before it was taken over by the Deuteronomists. One of the most important images of Kabbalah is the tree of life, associated with the goddess Ashara before the takeover. which is a clear and wonderful concept describing the web of relationships which connect invisible spirit with the fabric of life in this world. The branches of the inverted tree of life extend through multiple invisible worlds or dimensions until they manifest as our world. At the innermost level or dimension of reality is the unmanifest, unknowable, divine ground. At the outermost, the forms we call nature, body, and matter. In this cosmology, every aspect of creation, both visible and invisible, is interwoven with every other aspect. All is one life, one cosmic symphony, one integrated whole. We participate at this material level of creation in the divine life which informs all these levels of reality. Our human lives are inseparable from the inner life of the cosmos. The great maxim of the Kabbalists was, as above, so below, a maxim that originated in the Hermetic science taught in the temples of Egypt. The aim of the Kabbalist was and is to unite the two worlds, the invisible divine world with the world of our experience. Quintessentially, there is only one divine life. There is, therefore, no duality. The fundamental teaching of Kabbalah is the doctrine of emanation, and because of this, the oneness or unity of all cosmic dimensions of reality. Divine creative spirit, named as the unmanifest Godhead, Ein Sof, meaning the limitless light, is regarded as totally transcendent and unknowable, but also through emanation present in every particle of the created world, as well as in the intermediary dimensions of reality veiled from our sight. We are all participants in the life of the cosmos, atoms in the being and body of God. Kabbalah did not reject this world as fallen, as did Christianity, but saw it sustained and permeated by the light of the divine ground. It taught that whatever we do in this world affects the invisible worlds and vice versa, because everything, visible and invisible, is connected through an indissoluble web of life. The concept of reincarnation was intrinsic to this path to God. The soul becomes enlightened over many lives, at first through attraction to, then contemplation of, and finally communion with the invisible worlds. Kabbalah is the only cosmology in the West that celebrates the indissoluble union between the feminine and masculine aspects of the Godhead. It preserved the ancient Bronze Age image of the sacred marriage, reflected in the union of the divine Mother-Father in the ground of being, who are one in their ground, one in their emanation, one in their ecstatic and continuous act of creation through all the dimensions they bring into being and sustain. No other tradition offers the same breathtaking vision in such exquisite poetic imagery of the union of male and female energies in the one that is both. In this cosmology, the Shekhinah, or feminine face of the Godhead, is the co-creator of the world. She is named as divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit, and also as cosmic womb, architect of worlds, source or foundation of our world, and the radiance, word, or glory of the unknowable ground or Godhead. Text after text uses sexual imagery and the imagery of light, of an unimaginable luminosity and translucence, to describe how the ray emanating from the unknowable ground enters into the womb, the great sea of light or sea of glory of the celestial mother. From here, it emanates as a radiant cascade, a fountain of living water, pouring forth light to create, permeate, and sustain all the worlds or dimensions it brings into being. This cascade of light flows through two branches of the tree of life into the 10 female and male vessels, powers or attributes of the divine, named as the Sephiroth. A third branch descends directly down the center, unifying and connecting the energies on either side. The last, 10th sphere of creation is called Malkuth, the kingdom, where the divine mother-father image is expressed as the female and male of all species. All branches of the tree of life are connected through 22 paths, and nature is seen as the garment of God. All life on Earth, all levels and degrees of cosmic reality, all forms of what we see and name as matter are the creation of that primal fountain of light and are therefore an expression of divinity. In the radiance of that invisible cosmic sea of light, everything is connected to everything else as through a luminous circulatory system. Kabbalah gives us a highly developed cosmology of a conscious, intelligent, and constantly creative universe, with light as the creative agent that brings our universe into being. Now I come to the current cosmology of scientific materialism or physicalism. The 4,000-year-long process of separation during the solar era was largely unconscious. We have still not emerged from its influence or from the negative cosmology of the myth of the fall, which had gradually undermined the teaching of Christ about our innate divinity. Over recent centuries, we have reached dazzling heights of scientific, medical, and technological advances, which have transformed the condition of our lives on this planet and facilitated a phenomenal expansion of our ability to express the creative genius of our species in many different areas. But we have also suffered a catastrophic loss of soul, a loss of the ancient awareness of the sacred interweaving of all aspects of life, a loss of the sense of participation in the life of nature and the life of the cosmos, and, despite all our religions, a loss of relationship with spirit. Our conscious mind, a tiny aspect of our total psyche, has become detached from the deeper matrix of the primordial soul out of which it has evolved, and has become more and more inflated. It no longer has any awareness of or relationship with the psychic depths from which it has emerged, no relationship with nature or the cosmos, whose staggering extent, beauty, and complexity have been revealed to us by the Hubble telescope. In a secular culture, the rational human mind has virtually replaced God and no longer recognizes a dimension of reality beyond the material universe, nor any form of consciousness transcendent to its own. As D.H. Lawrence observed in his book on the Apocalypse in 1929, we have lost the cosmos. This has led, with the fading of the influence of Christianity, to the rise of the cosmology of scientific materialism, scientism, or physicalism, as it's recently been called, that developed during the Enlightenment of the 18th century and whose basic premises have been taught in our schools and universities for over 100 years. This cosmology, presented as incontrovertible truth, presents one huge problem. The material world is the only one it recognizes. The whole universe is seen as a lifeless mechanism without consciousness, purpose, intelligence, or meaning. It has no conscious beings in it apart from ourselves. We are separate from the life of nature and the life of the universe, both of which are deemed to be without consciousness. The scientists who promote this materialist belief system dismiss the idea of God, the soul, and life beyond death. Consciousness is generated by the neurons of the physical brain, so when the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. This cosmology has led to the belief that we can control the life of the planet to the sole advantage of our species, even to the splitting of the atom and the creation of our demonic weapons of mass destruction. Seeing all aspects of the world and the universe as devoid of consciousness and separate from ourselves has led to a catastrophic loss of soul and a loss of relationship with the planetary environment and the inner life of the cosmos. According to the psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist, who has just published a brilliant book called The Matter of Things, we have become prisoners of a literal left hemispheric mind, which has closed down access to the imaginative right hemisphere and has led to this disastrous misinterpretation of reality. When the left hemispheric rational mind is promoted as the only faculty which can define the nature of reality, it possesses, as Jung pointed out, a Promethean freedom, but it also partakes of a godless hubris. Now, with climate change, we are faced with the effects of the loss of our relationship with the earth and the ancient awareness that we live within a sacred order. We contemplate wars in space and pollute it with our debris. World leaders vie for power with each other, oblivious of the insanity of what they're doing. If there is a single idea that is facilitating the subjugation of nature and the devastation of the planet, it is the belief that the earth has no consciousness. It doesn't matter how we treat matter. Awakening to a new story is an evolutionary imperative at this time of unprecedented crisis, to free us from these scientific beliefs and the left hemispheric perspective that has increasingly imprisoned us. Without this awakening, we have no future as a species. The new story coming into being is that the whole universe is a unified field. In the words of physicist Nassim Haramein, a new cosmology is being born, a new vision of our profound relationship with a conscious, intelligent, and interconnected universe. This new cosmology invites what Owen Barfield called final participation, when we are reunited with that from which we have become separated. There is an emerging consensus among certain physicists, astrophysicists, and cosmologists that consciousness, not matter, is the primary ground of reality, that the material world exists within consciousness. Amit Goswami, in his book, The Self-Aware Universe, states unequivocally that consciousness is the ground of all being, and quantum physics makes this as clear as daylight. These scientists are seeing the universe as a living organism, with the seen and unseen aspects of it functioning as a unified whole. As Plotinus said long ago, everything breathes together. Our consciousness is part of an underlying field, not separate from it, and certainly not created by the neurons of the physical brain. Each of us carries the holographic imprint of the entire universe within us. No matter what our race, nation, gender, or caste, we are all equally part of the living, breathing, connecting web of life, which underlies and connects all forms in the universe and on our planet. Following Plato, I call this web of life the soul of the cosmos. I prefer the word soul to mind because it carries a feminine resonance. This doesn't exclude mind or field, but I like it to be included as one of a trinity, as it were. With the discovery of the quantum plenum underlying our space-time reality, we find the idea returning after a 4,000-year absence of a cosmic womb out of which all that we call reality arises, and to which it may return, similar to the outbreathing and inbreathing of the great cosmic cycles posited by the Vedic sages of India. The realization that we participate in a cosmic consciousness that is the source and ground of our own consciousness could shatter the belief that material reality is all there is, that we exist in a randomly created universe, and that there is no life beyond death. The discoveries now being made challenge what science has programmed us to believe, that we as humans are separate from all other species and from the life of the planet and the universe. The astounding discoveries of quantum physics tell us that our world of matter is like a visible foam resting on a very deep ocean of light that permeates every cell of our being. We are not only connected with each other through the astonishing reach of the internet, but through the infinitesimal particles of subatomic matter. In our essence, we are not fallen beings, but beings of light, cosmic beings, incarnated on this planet for an evolutionary purpose. All life at the deepest level is essentially one, and each of us is an expression of the one, inseparable from it. Nor are we alone in the universe. There is emerging evidence from ancient cultures that our planet has been visited repeatedly by inhabitants from other planetary systems. I see this great revelation that is happening as the fulfillment of what I call the dream of the cosmos. It's longing for us to recover the relationship we once had with it and take it further. We are rediscovering at a new turn of the spiral of evolution what was known to shamans millennia ago in the lunar culture of the Great Mother, and described in minute detail in the Cosmology of Kabbalah. We are not separate from the divinity we have been worshipping for thousands of years, but are an intrinsic part of its life, its mind, and its soul. The greatest spiritual teachers have told us that we carry divinity within our nature, but the religions of the world have not transmitted that knowledge to us. Divinity is the ground of all that we call life. At the heart of the cosmos is a love of unimaginable dimensions, a love that sustains the entire universe and is the origin of our own capacity to love and to create. In 1600, before he was burnt at the stake by the Inquisition, because he refused to deny that God was present in nature, Giordano Bruno said, "A single force, love, links and gives life to infinite worlds." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. You took us on an amazing journey from ancient Egypt through Western culture to the Kabbalah, to science, to modern day new paradigm cosmologies. Thank you for doing that. We have several questions. One is from Alana Maslova-Levin, who asked, is the loss of the goddess the cause of our separation from nature or an expression of this separation?
Both. Both.
They happen, one feeds the other.
Yes, it just, I mean, tracing this all through the solar era, one can see what happened so clearly. People didn't realize what was happening, but in losing the goddess, people lost the connection with nature, and they also lost the sense of keeping in harmony with the cosmos that Fred talks so beautifully about. They lost all idea that we had to keep in harmony with it. They put all the emphasis on belief, the religions, not on the necessity of harmony with the cosmos.
Let's see, I have a question for you. Each of the cosmologies you spoke of seem to have a pretty wide impact on society. I was wondering if the Kabbalah had a wide impact, or was it pretty much limited to those who practiced it?
It was limited because it would have been persecuted by the Catholic Church if the people had been known what they were doing. It was against the religion of Christianity as it was taught by the Vatican or the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And those people would have been murdered by the Inquisition, as Giordano Bruno was. But the Kabbalists were alchemists. Many of them were alchemists. So you have the train of alchemy going back to Egypt, but it was always a secret underground tradition, like a golden thread running underneath Christianity, if you like, in Western civilization.
And it was also part of the Jewish tradition as
Absolutely.
well. And so was it also something tabooed by the rabbis who would repress it?
I think it must have been, because it seems to have developed as a separate cosmology. And it moved from, first of all, from Jerusalem, it moved to Alexandria, and then it moved to the Holy Land, to Palestine, and then back to Spain in the Middle Ages, and then into Europe from Spain, where Pico della Mirandola was trying to create a fusion of Christianity and Kabbalah. Fascinating insight there, to bring them together so that Christianity could retain or regain what it had lost in its teaching, which was the divinity of the individual and the divinity of the whole of creation, including the material world. So it's just so exciting to follow this through and to see what the Kabbalists and the alchemists were trying to do. But as I said, if they'd put their head above the parapet, they would have been burnt at the stake. So they kept quiet. This was in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries that they did the most of their work, but it originated much, much earlier. In Spain, it was more the 12th and 13th centuries that it flourished.
That's fascinating to see that thread. Let's see, people are asking about the pandemic. Do you have any thoughts about?
Yes, I do have most definite thoughts. I think the pandemic is a wake-up call. I think it's been created by our disrespect for nature. I think it's nature's response to the way it's been treated, partly. I think it's also something that got out of a laboratory at Wuhan, which is a biological weapon. Whether it got out intentionally or unintentionally, I can't say, but I'm quite sure that's where it came from. And it's spread all over the world. It's affected the entire world. Nobody is exempt. So we're all involved. And I think this is important because it's actually restoring our unity, disregarding nations, disregarding religions or sects or genders or whatever. It's affecting every single inhabitant in the world. And this is really, I think, a wake-up call, a very, very powerful wake-up call to change our whole way of living and behaving and to get ourselves back into harmony with the cosmos. This is a sign that we're out of harmony, and it's a warning, and we need to get back into harmony and really heal the whole planet and heal ourselves, because we're all sick because we're so out of connection with the cosmos. There's so much illness in our world, whether it's mental illness or illnesses like cancer and diabetes. We're saturated with illness, which we shouldn't be. This comes from being completely out of order, out of harmony with the cosmos and with the earth above all.
Well, beautifully said. Thank you, Anne. I'll just close with one of these comments from a person in the audience who said, "This was so beautiful, balm for my soul. Thank you, Mother, Father, and precious Anne. Be well and be safe."
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne, for joining us today. So now we're going to move on to the final speaker, and the final speaker for this session is Anneloes Smitsman. She's going to be speaking about applying the cosmic architecture of consciousness for a new world paradigm. Dr. Anneloes is a visionary scientist, published author, futurist, system architect, and leadership catalyst for the transition to a thrivable civilization. She's the founder and CEO of Earthwise Center and a founding member of the creative board of the Laszlo Institute. She holds a master's degree in law and judicial political sciences from Leiden University in the Netherlands, and a degree of doctor from Maastricht University, also in the Netherlands. Her groundbreaking PhD dissertation, Into the Heart of Systems Change, addressed how to diagnose and transform key systemic barriers of our world crisis through its proposed transition plan for a thrivable civilization. Anneloes is the co-author of the Future Humans trilogy with Dr. Jean Houston, and is the author of the Amazon international bestseller, Love Letters from Mother Earth, The Promise of a New Beginning, as well as many scientific articles and chapters in international peer-reviewed journals and books. Anneloes is the lead architect of the Earthwise Tipping Point system. She's a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, part of the Source of Energy Synergy Foundation. And again, her talk will be applying the cosmic architecture of consciousness for a new world paradigm. All right, I turn it over to you, Anneloes.
Thank you so much, Richard. And before we go into the slides, just to honor Anne, it's such an honor to come after her. And let's just take a moment to really integrate what she just shared with us, because that's huge, huge. So I just want to ask everyone, just close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath. Hold it for a few seconds and then breathe out and let go and connect with that beautiful cosmos. Really feel the cosmos in you. Just take a moment to really receive and integrate this profound wisdom that Anne just shared and the others before her. And just come fully present here and now in this collective field of us here. Feel the cosmos within you and around you and in our world. It's that beautiful wisdom of the wholeness that we are and the unity that we are, which has inspired humanity from its very beginnings to ask these deeper questions of who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to be human? And know that in those questions, that have been connecting us for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The cosmos is always present. And now let us begin. So when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Good. Having listened now to all these incredible speakers, I'm actually going to make my presentation a little bit more interactive, because I know that also the last one in this series, and I want to make sure that all of you are active and with us here before we go into more interaction. So I'm going to share my slides with you now. Applying the cosmic architecture of consciousness for a new world paradigm. So even just this image that's inviting us, and as I was listening to Anne talking about the era of the moon and then the sun, what came to me, perhaps this next era of the cosmology is of the black hole. Interesting, now that we are discovering there's a black hole really at the center of our galaxy and the universe, which is another way of also of looking at the womb. And that brings us right into here. So the question I want to be exploring with all of you, and know, of course, that this is a model. This is just one interpretation, one way of conceptualizing these deeper questions of what is the nature of reality, what's the nature of consciousness, and what's the nature of life. Let's just explore what happens when we look at the cosmic architecture of consciousness as the informational dynamics of life. And as you can see here, I do take the position of the primacy of consciousness, as has been reinstated here by many people, as well as, of course, the official position of the Laszlo Institute itself, is that consciousness is primary. And we have different words for it, but let's just, for now, let's call this black space of the no-thingness, or the Akashic field, or the unified field, the pure consciousness within which we are having this conversation right now. So this pure consciousness is, we could also see it as, that's the infinite. But within the infinite, there is an architecture, a cosmological architecture for making the finite possible. And if we're then looking at our universe as a finite reality, a unified finite reality within the play of the infinite, and then understand that you are both. And when we are seeing then this great darkness, this great womb, the great no-thingness, or as the Kabbalists, which was also explored as the Ein Sof, which was concealed to be revealed, and the revelation happening through our interaction from where we are within our local reality, within this physical space-time universe, connecting with and calling upon and calling forth the great potentiality and wisdom of the infinite, of the pure consciousness, of the non-local dimensions of pure consciousness. And what I'd like to bring your attention now to is that there is a space between this, or you could call a dimensional interface between the pure consciousness, the infinite, and our physical universe, our local reality. And that's the imaginal. And in the imaginal, in that kind of interface, cosmic interface, that is able to draw upon and bring forth the great potentialities of pure consciousness, and being able to converge them algorithmically in a way that it helps to manifest and co-create this physical reality. But this imaginal process takes place within you all of the time. And the imaginal here is not just the imaginative. So many of us are familiar with the words the imaginative and using your imagination, but that is still very much in the space of the mind. Whereas the imaginal, you could think of it as a space within living systems itself that is not predetermined. You could almost say where the algorithms break down, where it is possible to make new choices and where it is possible for systems to restructure, recouple in order to be able to regroup and to continuously evolve. This imaginal space, we could also think of that as the future, so that when we are within our local reality and we are considering future as that which has not yet been made manifest, another way to work with that, what has not yet been made manifest but already exists. It exists in this superposition state of possibility. And that means that these future potentials of higher orders of reality also already exist in you and they exist in our world. And that's really important right now, because the worlds that we have created, co-created, the human worlds, the human systems, and the human architectures of those systems, operating systems. But very often the problem is that, first of all, they've been very much disconnected and decoupled from this understanding of pure consciousness. They're also by design are not regenerative because they don't allow spaces for the imaginal. They don't allow spaces for sensing into these greater possibilities because they're so product and consumption and goal oriented. And that when you leave that for the imaginal out and you leave the future creative potentials out of those designs and systems, what you're getting is a system that is unsustainable by design, therefore not regenerative, therefore also not future creative. And what we really are seeing now, and we call that the mechanistic worldview, the mechanistic paradigm, that paradigm, it has come to its end. It's no longer sustainable. Out of that paradigm, we've really manifested and co-created this sustainability crisis, the climate crisis, code red situation right now for our planet. And if we continue like this, moving to extinction. So it's very, very important that we start to understand the cosmic architecture of consciousness as the informational dynamics of life, and what that means for the redesign and the transformation of our mechanistic models and systems that are very, very, very harmful. So also, as we are exploring this, just think about, therefore, these future potentials in you from the imaginal realm of consciousness, and how even as you're listening right now, by the use and power of your intention, you can activate those. You can make space for those realities within yourself so that it becomes possible also for your own experience of consciousness, your relationship with life to evolve, and to evolve from more integral and more subtle, deeper cosmic orders of our unity and our wholeness that are incredibly important for the maturation of our consciousness, the evolutionary development of our species. And what we can see so beautifully in nature is that this informational dynamics of the cosmic architecture has a fractal, holonic growth pattern. And so here are just a few examples of that beautiful spiraling process that's not just happening in nature, but it's also all the time happening within us, within our bodies, within our mind, within our feelings, even within our dreams, this great spiral of life that unfolds us, through which we come to express ourselves and expand, but also where it's really important that we know how to go back within and gather ourselves and to receive and to go back into the beautiful cosmic dreaming that Anne also spoke of earlier. And here we have again the tree of life that you just heard about from Anne in the Kabbalah. The tree of life as a cosmological concept lives in many different traditions, wisdom traditions and cultures. So another way to look at the cosmic architecture of consciousness is that it actually architecturally is like a great cosmic tree, a great tree of life that has the capacity to receive these potentialities of the unified field of consciousness, and then to embody that, and out of that to manifest that incredible diversity of life in the physical world. So think of yourself also as that tree, because that architecture of this tree of life, of this cosmic tree, is within your own body, mind, spirit system. So that is innate and you can work with that. So you already have the cosmic interface within yourself as well, in order to be able to receive the nourishment and the wisdom and the growth potentials from the great unified field of consciousness, as well as the capacity for being able to localize that so that it becomes a self-aware experience, and to be able to manifest that in life from wholeness and from that unity. And you can think of that cosmic architecture of consciousness also as a great womb. And why a great womb? Because the architecture itself has the capacity to localize from the non-local, has the capacity to receive, and in its receiving to be able to contain, so that it becomes a self-aware, individuated experiences, and then for it to be able to birth those great potentials of consciousness into our world. And so this womb is innate in the cosmic architecture of your own being. And that means for man and woman. So man also have womb space within them. So anytime that you're working with bringing your vision into being, tapping into these greater ideas, exploring the greater questions of life, and then letting it integrate, letting it localize, letting it land, letting it take roots, you are then working with the womb wisdom of the cosmic architecture of consciousness and life. Together with my co-author and dear friend, Dr. Jean Houston, we've been exploring this in depth in two of our books, and The Quest of Rose from the Future Humans trilogies, the first book that's already out, and in March of next year, we'll be sharing the second book, Return of the Avatars. And now I'd like to contextualize this further through three evolutionary principles of life. For those of you who were also with us yesterday and listened to the wonderful talk by Dr. Jude Carvin, you may recall how she was talking about the reinterpretation of the three laws of thermodynamics as three laws of informational dynamics or infodynamics. And those three evolutionary principles of life that I'll be sharing with you follow a similar kind of pattern. And they are very important in the application for how to redesign our governance systems, our economic systems, and our educational systems, so that the cosmology of oneness, of unity and wholeness is not just a philosophical concept, but that we can truly start to now apply that and live that and make this a concrete reality for how we as a species are sharing our planetary home with countless of other beings. So the first principle, and you've heard this throughout the conference, is that the universe exists and evolves as a single unified entity. So non-locally, it is unified. It is an undividable wholeness, as physicist David Bohm also shared. And this evolutionary principles helps us then to understand life as that unified reality. And energy, matter, and space-time can be seen as complementary information expressions then of that same pure consciousness, or universal consciousness. So just to integrate that for a moment, just understand yourself then also as whole and unified. And that no matter whether you feel divided sometimes, or whether you feel torn, or whether you find it difficult to get in touch with a certain aspect of yourself, all of that is still happening within you as a single unified entity, as in a way that the same holographic principle fractals out. So in the same way that the universe is whole and unified, so are you within that, no matter what you're thinking. And here is another way of conceptualizing that. And you see this amazing image here where the question mark, our beginning, we don't quite know, or we don't have, you say the complete proof of knowing how did it all begin, but we have a lot of different theories around that. And the same thing for our future, the second question mark. But what we can start to see, and whether we call it the Big Bang or the big outbreath, is that origin moment of our universe, in that incredible potentiality, the journey that it now goes through in its finite journey, again taking place within this larger, infinite, pure consciousness. And that where you see the arrow, our galaxy, that's about where we are now. And that when we are looking at these laws of informational dynamics, then we start to also see that as we are progressing from this beginning point towards our future, is that the informational content within our universe increases, but in a way that is embodied and evolutionary coherent, so that consciousness is able to actualize in the living visible experience. I believe this is really important, because there's been so often this duality positioning as if spirit or consciousness on the one hand or matter on the other hand. But when we're really seeing them as complementary and start to understand how the locality serves to the actualization of consciousness, and how the non-local consciousness serves to the manifestation of its potentiality, then all those other divisional questions and perceptions start to fall away. And what we're left with is this amazing sense of awe of this incredible architecture of consciousness of life. And what an incredible journey we are on to be able to be part of that, to discover that, for that to now start to come alive in our awareness and in our questions. And another perspective of being able to look at the infinite and the finite, as Sir Roger Penrose suggested, is also the cyclical process of the universes. So here you see the toroidal model, which I shared in the first slide, but now on its side, you could start to also imagine how that gives rise to universes within universes. So that at the end of this universe, so that coded from the very beginning of the universe, is also the completion of this universe, but in such a way that it gives rise and gives birth to another beginning, just like a great womb. And that brings me then to the second evolutionary principle, and that is that the universe evolves through deepening evolutionary coherence and increasing embodied complexity, precisely tuned to make life possible. Now, in our human societies and our human technologies, we have created a lot of extra complexity, but not necessarily evolutionary coherent complexity, or complexity that is really embodied within the life cycles and life processes. For example, when we're looking at our economic systems, which have become very complex, but the problem with our economic systems is that we externalized so many of the informational flows and dynamics of nature, and therefore we are actually causing a lot of harm to the natural living systems. So this understanding, this principle of what are the conditions for creating evolutionary coherent systems and cultures, and this understanding of how do we embody this increasing complexity that is part of the evolutionary process, is probably the most fundamental understanding that is necessary for resolving our sustainability crisis. It's really a key principle for knowing how do we then architect and design for regeneration, for thrivability, because the living systems in the cosmological architecture of consciousness itself, by design, are designed to thrive. But if we're looking at the way, again, we've created our human systems and cultures, when we've decoupled from this larger cosmological understanding, is that we have created very different informational flows and dynamics that are going contrary to that, and therefore very damaging. So this principle as well is really, really important right now, especially in light of the crisis that we are in. And here we're seeing some beautiful examples of this evolutionary coherence. I like to think of evolutionary coherence as this invisible conductor And it's always there that when we are in tune with it, or we can say we are in tune with that deeper wisdom of the unified field, of this deeper in cosmological or cosmic intelligence, and we in tune with that, it harmonizes us. There's a deeper resonance that we know how to play our right note and tone in relation to each other without there being a system imposed upon us. So coherence is not the same as cohesion. Cohesion is enforced. Cohesion is very often top down. Whereas coherence is our spontaneous coordination, spontaneous collaboration, spontaneous co-creation. From the tuning of our unity, the tuning of our wholeness, the tuning of our collaborative diversity. There's therefore always an experience of beauty, of peace, of love that goes with the evolutionary coherence. And that brings me then to the third principle, and that's then to that deeper understanding of how then is our universe kind of designed to be able to self-actualize in consciousness. What does that mean? And then we can see that it develops its evolutionary capacities by actualizing its cosmological potentials to the following conditions. The first one is systemic autonomy. This principle, especially in the mechanistic paradigm, has been confused with thinking autonomy means individualism through separation. And if we're looking also at the same time when this Newtonian idea started to emerge, we also started to see in fields like law and governance this notion that the individual rights and individual property have to be protected, which is completely different from systemic autonomy that we are seeing within nature. And systemic autonomy is really the cosmological architecture for being able to have a self-aware individual experience of the unity and wholeness that we are, not away from, but of that, so that your individuality, your sense of personhood and selfhood emerges from that unity, from that wholeness that we fundamentally are, and that with the systemic autonomy come essential capacities, such as the capacity of self-creation, regulation, and adaptation, which can also be summarized as autopoietic capacities that living systems have, that we all have, but that we have not been by design applying in the majority of our dominant economic, governance, and educational systems. So these principles, evolutionary principles, for showing us how to architect and design with the systemic conditions for growing, developing, and evolving as a self-actualizing process of consciousness, are vital, vital, vital right now. And for being able now to constitutionalize this new paradigm, because for the new paradigm to become a living experience for all of us on Earth, to become really a new world paradigm, it's really important that we apply this all across, also in the way that we grow and we are developing ourselves as a species, but also in the way that we cultivate and share and distribute our resources, for example. And that brings me then here to several applications of this cosmic architecture. The first one, which I'm not part of, but I was so inspired by, so I just wanted to share that with you. You may know of Professor Neri Oxman's work. What you see there is a collaboration between a 3D printed structural shell and honeybees. And if you look at her research and her teams, you see there's a lot of these new technologies that where they're really applying this cosmic architecture, these regenerative principles in design, creating, for example, biodigital materials that are programmed in order to be able to break down, and as they decompose, they help to support the diversity of nature. So it's a completely different way of thinking, again, about also architecture in forms of materials, in forms of buildings, in forms of cities, in being able to create cities, buildings, houses that are really designed as a living body. So this is really what I'm seeing as kind of having a future entrance, a view into where this new paradigm cosmology can take us when we apply this. The second example here is the seeds constitution. Seeds is a new regenerative ecosystem for regenerative economics and governance. And I'm the lead author of or architects of the seeds constitution, where these three evolutionary principles of life that I've shared with you have been applied all the way through the constitution and worked out in great details how we then apply that now for creating new protocols on blockchain based, new algorithms that are following these same cosmological principles, and therefore can also then start to, by design, reward and support these collaborative behaviors that are so important, and this deeper understanding of this holonic governance. In the third example here, that's part of an educational transformation blueprint, where I've served as the lead author for an organization called R3.0, where we've been together with a wonderful team that Alexander Laszlo has also been part of, where we've been really exploring now what happens if we apply this principle for the transformation of educational systems, but also start to re-envision now what are the learning perspectives? What is an educational system that's out of which these new paradigm people will emerge, and how we can nurture that process. And in the fourth example is a chapter I wrote together with Dr. Jude Carafan, where we applied these principles in the field of agroecologies to start to say, if we apply this now for how we grow and cultivate and harvest and share our foods, what are then the implications? So I believe those slides will all become available later. So all of those are linked so that you can follow up on those resources if you like. So I'd like to complete then with a question to all of you. What world is born through you? What world is born through you? What world potentials? What are the architecture, the qualities of that world that exists in you that you are giving life to? Because we are all co-creating these worlds all the time. So what world is born through you? What world are you relaxing into? What world are you giving your energy to? And what world paradigm are you nurturing? Are you helping to form and come into being? And I'd like to ask you then also in the completion of this session, how are you going to integrate and apply everything that you've been hearing today from all of us? How are you going to, what's going to be your next step towards being able to co-create this new world paradigm of this beautiful, thrivable world that's whole, that's unified, that is life-centered, that celebrates who we all are, and that is home for each and every one of us.
Thank you so much, Anneloes. Very interesting how you're taking the new cosmic paradigm and then applying it to specific disciplines or activities like architecture, education. The other symposium was on politics, and there's quite a lot there. Do you want to just speak a little bit about what you spoke about at the political symposium for those of us who were not there? Just take maybe a minute to kind of give the main points of what you expressed there.
My pleasure, yes. Well, if we're looking at the dominant political models and even democracy itself, the design principle of those have come again out of this mechanistic paradigm. And democracy by design is a system of winners and losers. And the problem with democracy is therefore for it to renew itself, it always has to reject part of itself, which nature doesn't do. And what we can see now in a world that is already, with all the issues that are going on right now, so polarized, and there are so many fears and concerns for people, is that the old paradigm governance models, the old paradigm conceptualization of these democracies, and in particular also the role of law, role of law as punitive, as corrective, is really not helping when you're in a crisis situation, where you get on the one hand these system reactions, knee-jerk reactions from political leaders to want to exercise more control in the face of more fear and chaos. Or otherwise, we're getting a lot of people who are feeling this complete breakdown of trust, of not feeling represented in decisions that are made, and therefore going through extremist parties, protest votes. So what we're seeing is that this new paradigm in governance, the new paradigm in politics, is essential. And that means that we need to start to understand how we can apply these holonic principles from this cosmological understanding of a unified reality of life, also in the reconceptualization of law, in a reconceptualization of how do we create now a new model of democracy that is far more inclusive, far more participatory. But we explored also in that conference is how, for example, the new digital technologies, what we're calling in the Web3 landscapes, make that possible. So there are whole new mechanisms in which people are being able to give a vote in real time, don't have to wait every 4 years, can have their voices heard. But what we're seeing is that the way that democracy is starting to shift itself, so it's not that democracy is dead, it's not that the democracy itself is receding, but it's shifting. It's shifting away from the systems that are not in line with the spirit of democracy. And it's now starting to move through a lot of new entrepreneurial development of people and reorganize itself in ways that are not yet recognized and acknowledged by the conventional systems. And therefore, there's a big call out to the conventional system to recognize these new forms in which people are self-organizing, are coming together, creating also new economic systems, are coming together to be able to coordinate and distribute in a far more inclusive and fair manner resources as well as responsibilities as well as opportunities. So that's why it's so exciting what we're doing here at the Laszlo Institute, where we are really exploring these big issues from new paradigm of politics to the new paradigm now in cosmology and on, to getting this fuller understanding really of the transformations that are happening, but are often not mentioned also in the media, and therefore a lot of people are not aware of that.
Just to say, if anyone has a question, they should raise their hand. One thing that caught my attention was when you said like the democracy can happen in real time. I imagine technology can play a major role in that.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, we do have a question from Scroll Raider. If I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, Scroll Raider. It's just a handle up. I have a hobby of decoding ancient writings, and it has a great deal to do with this cosmos, but we're discussing economics. And one of the models that I depicted from the ancient writings, I pushed through the World Bank, got involved in the creation of a knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy being part of the base of a type 1 civilization progression. Now, and you speak about technology, and I'm curious, what is your thought about how the datification of objects is disintegrating the identity of consciousness? And what's your thoughts on, if this were to continue, how would that roll over as we do when we will transform into a type 1 civilization? Most physicists agree with this, and this is the most challenging time. And these are the most important generations to be on the earth. But most physicists feel that this type 1 civilization is so risky that that is what will destroy us. And what's your thoughts about the role of cosmos in that thinking that will help us make it through that type 1 civilization transition?
Very interesting question. But my own view on this is very often when you're looking at trends, you can see different manifestations of the same trend. So if we're seeing, for example, you have a unification that is happening technologically but without a consciousness understanding, which can be very harmful. We have also unification that is happening in the way that we're all coming together here, and people's heartful understanding of what it means to be human. So what you sometimes see is you have the shadow equivalent of it. So for example, there are people who are envisioning a humanity that becomes very much robotic, algorithmically programmed. If we are distributing decision-making and power and governance more and more to artificial intelligence that's always algorithmically designed, then we are missing fundamentally the quality of consciousness that is not algorithmic, which even Sir Roger Penrose himself stated that even artificial intelligence is in one of his talks that it's not very intelligent, it may be artificial smartness, because consciousness fundamentally is not computational, it's not algorithmic. So I think that the understanding again as cosmos or the cosmic architecture, if we're trying to bring this down again only in terms of a digitized informational without this larger element of the heart that Anne also spoke with, and the element of wisdom in which all of this integrates, then we're on a dangerous trajectory. But it comes there from my view is therefore that the role of education is going to be incredibly important. But also if we're looking where are we heading now with increased potentials of planetary crisis after crisis, given the climate situation that we are in, I think in those moments when your own environment is flooding, or here where we are in Mauritius, where we have cyclone after cyclone, you have fires breaking down, you're not thinking about a digital universe. It's not technology that's going to get you out of that. It's being able in those breakdown conditions to reach out to your neighbors and say, can I help you? How are you doing? So I also have a sense that there is a larger wisdom here that's also facilitating, in some ways we can't yet see or understand yet, the conditions for being able to mature as a species and force us in many ways into a collaboration that is not just technologically based or outcome driven, but that really will come down to the awakening of the heart of humanity.
Sounds good. Let's see, we've got time for one question. Let's see, Peter Enberg, if you can unmute yourself, if you can make your question very concise, and Anneloes will ask for a concise answer, and then we'll be able to take a 15-minute break before we get into the panel discussion. There you are. Great. Go ahead, ask your question.
Thank you, because the issue of education today is really essential. And I'd like to explore with you how we are going from information to wisdom. If you look at the gallery of the people in this seminar, you'll see that there are very few people under 30. And so how to make the exploration of wisdom and the development of wisdom more attractive to the young generations who are coming after us. That's the question.
I love that. And I could talk an hour about that. I'll be very concise. For me, that starts with experience. Introduce children from a very, very early age to be able to relate with life, relate with nature. So wisdom is, for me, it's about the lived knowledge. It's being able to apply that. So help children recognize where the unity is. When they're holding a rock in their hands, help them to feel the earth within that rock and the whole history that is present in that rock. When they're breathing the air, help them understand how that air has been circulating around and around. Help them to experience the universe in them. The wisdom is grown through the heart. Really help children to trust their hearts, because the heart that's in them connects to the heart of the cosmos. And that is the deepest, most innate education that reaches the children also when they're sleeping. So help them trust their hearts. That's my shortest answer that I can give to this.
Wonderful answer, Anneloes. I think it's a message for all of us to trust our hearts, take us all very far forward.